The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the Lowe's Angel smog when 9-year-old Kesha Williams woke beneath the vinyl awning of a shuttered pawn shop. Her stomach growled. A familiar companion that had sung this hollow song for 3 years now, ever since Grandma Dorothy passed away and the world became a much colder place. Kesha sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the broken guitar resting beside her like a loyal friend. She'd found it in a dumpster 3 weeks ago, its neck cracked and strings loose, but to her, it was treasure. She ran her fingers along the worn wood, remembering how Grandma Dorothy used to say that music lived not in the instrument but in the heart of the one who played it. "Music is our secret weapon, baby girl," Grandma Dorothy would whisper during their practice sessions in that tiny Harlem apartment that now felt like a lifetime ago. "They can take our homes, our money, our dignity, but they can never take what God put in our voices." Kesha's fingers found the strings, coaxing a melody from the damaged instrument. The notes wobbled but held true enough. She closed her eyes and began to sing, her voice rising clear and strong above the rumble of morning traffic. A few coins clinked into the empty coffee can at her feet, breakfast if she was lucky. That's when they found her. 3 people in matching, black shirts with clipboards materialized like shadows made solid. The woman in front wore sunglasses that cost more than Kesha had seen in months. "Oh my God," the woman breathed, nudging her colleague. "Marcus, are you seeing this?" Marcus, a thin man with a headset wrapped around his neck, grinned wide. "Perfect. This is exactly what Richard wants for the episode." Kesha stopped singing, her small frame tensing with the instinct that had kept her alive on these streets. She knew that look, the way people's eyes changed when they saw her not as a person, but as a thing to be used. "Sweetie," the woman crouched down, her smile too bright, too practiced. "How would you like to be on television? We're from Stars of America, you know, the talent show. We're looking for special kids to perform." Kesha studied the woman's face, reading the subtext beneath the sugary words. She'd learned to see through masks, to hear what people didn't say. "What kind of special?" she asked quietly. "Oh, you know," the woman waved her hand vaguely. "Unique performers, kids with interesting stories. You get to sing on the biggest stage in Lowe's Angels." Marcus checked his watch impatiently. "Richard wants diversity for the finale slot. This is gold. Come on, kid, yes or no, we have a show to produce." Kesha looked down at her bare feet, dirty from weeks without proper shelter. She looked at her broken guitar, at the $3.47 in her can. Then she looked back up at these television people with their clipboards and expensive shoes, and something hardened inside her chest, not bitterness, but resolve. "If I sing well," she said slowly, meeting the woman's eyes, "will you give me a meal?" The woman's smile flickered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Oh, honey, if you do what we need, we'll feed you all you want." What they needed, not what she deserved, not what she'd earned, what they needed from her. Kesha stood up, tucking the guitar under her arm. "Okay," she said simply, "I'll come." As they led her toward a gleaming black van, Kesha slipped her hand into her torn backpack and felt the edge of the yellowed envelope hidden at the bottom, Grandma Dorothy's letter, the one with instructions she'd memorized by heart. "Only open when you're ready to use everything I taught you." Looking at the glittering Lowe's Angels skyline in the distance, Kesha whispered to herself, "I'm ready now, Grandma. It's time." Part 2, the setup. The television studio towered above the Lowe's Angels streets like a glass and steel cathedral to American dreams. Kesha followed the production assistants through a back entrance, her bare feet silent on the polished floors, while their designer shoes clicked with confident authority. Inside, the hallway buzzed with organized chaos. Children in expensive performance outfits practiced scales and dance moves while their parents fussed over every detail. Makeup artists rushed between dressing rooms carrying palettes that probably cost more than Kesha had eaten in a year. "Wait here," Marcus said, pointing to a spot against the wall. Richard wants to meet all the performers before we go live. Kesha settled onto the cold floor, hugging her guitar. She watched as one by one, the other children were greeted with enthusiasm and warmth. A blonde girl around 12 years old stepped out of a dressing room wearing a glittering dress, her father beside her adjusting a silk scarf around her shoulders. "Ashley, princess, remember what we practiced," the father said, his voice carrying easily down the hall. "You're going to shine brighter than all these other kids. This is your moment." Ashley tossed her perfectly styled hair. "I know, Daddy. Ms. Chen from the conservatory says my vibrato is already at professional level." "That's my girl." A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit emerged from an office, clapping his hands to gather attention. This had to be Richard Brennan, the producer Marcus had mentioned. Everything about him screamed authority and arrogance, from his crisp white shirt to the Rolex glinting on his wrist. "Attention, everyone," Richard's voice boomed. "You are the future stars of American music. Today the whole country will watch you shine. Remember confidence, technique, and star quality. That's what we're looking for." He moved through the group of children, shaking hands, offering encouragement, his smile broad and practiced. When he reached Ashley, he spent extra time praising her conservatory training and exceptional pedigree. Then his eyes landed on Kesha. The smile didn't disappear. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it shifted into something else entirely, something that made Kesha's skin prickle with recognition. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of people who stepped over her on sidewalks, who clutched their purses tighter when she walked by, who looked through her as if she were invisible. Richard approached slowly, his polished shoes stopping inches from her bare feet. "And who do we have here?" His tone was different now, lighter, almost amused, like someone discovering an unexpected joke. "Kesha Williams, sir," she said, keeping her voice steady and respectful. "Kesha, how charming," he glanced at his clipboard. "Ah yes, you're our special edition, the girl Marcus found singing on the street." "Yes, sir." Richard crouched down, his expensive cologne washing over her. "Tell me, Kesha, do you even know any real songs? Not just, street music." Something flickered in Kesha's chest, not anger but a kind of cold clarity. "I know a few songs, sir." "A few," he repeated, straightening up. His laugh was soft but carried perfectly to every ear in the hallway. "Well, we'll see what we can do with that. You'll be performing last, after all the trained vocalists have shown what real talent looks like." Ashley and several other children giggled. Their parents shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, their silence complicit. "Can I ask you a question, sir?" Kesha said, tilting her head with careful innocence. Richard checked his watch. "Make it quick." "Do you have children?" The question caught him off guard. "I do, 2 daughters, why?" "Just curious," Kesha replied, filing that information away in the careful mental catalog she'd been building since they arrived. She smiled, a small, enigmatic smile that made Richard frown slightly before he turned away. 15 minutes to showtime, people," he called out. "Let's make television magic." As the hallway emptied toward the stage, Kesha remained seated against the wall. She opened her backpack and carefully withdrew the yellowed envelope, running her fingers over Grandma Dorothy's handwriting. A shadow fell across her lap. She looked up to find Ashley standing there, arms crossed, a smirk playing at her lips. "You're really going to try to sing on that thing?" Ashley gestured at the broken guitar. "I've been training at the Manhattan School of Music for 6 years. My private instructors cost $500 an hour." "That sounds like wonderful training," Kesha said evenly. "Do you even know how to read music?" "I know a few things." Ashley's father appeared behind her, placing a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. He looked down at Kesha with something like pity mixed with disdain. "Come on, princess. Don't worry about her. She's here too. Well, let's just say she'll help you shine even brighter by comparison." They walked away, leaving Kesha alone with her broken guitar and her grandmother's letter. She whispered the words Dorothy had written. "When the world tries to diminish you, you grow twice as big. When they try to silence you, you sing 3 times as loud. Today, Grandma, today I sing for both of us." Part 3. Recognition and Revelation. The backstage area hummed with pre-show energy. While Ashley and the other children received final touch-ups from professional makeup artists, Kesha remained in her corner, quietly tuning her broken guitar with a precision that would have surprised anyone paying attention. But nobody was paying attention. Refreshments for the performers. A cheerful production assistant wheeled in a cart laden with gourmet sandwiches, fresh fruit, and bottled water. The children swarmed it like well-dressed locusts. Kesha stood and approached the table, her stomach hollow with 3 days of hunger. The assistant's hand shot out, gently but firmly blocking her path. "Oh, sweetie, these are for the official contestants." Her smile was apologetic but final. "I am performing," Kesha said quietly. The woman consulted her clipboard, her expression shifting to something like uncomfortable recognition. Oh, you're the special girl." The way she emphasized special made it clear it wasn't a compliment. "Well, you're listed separately. I'm sure there's something for you later." Kesha stepped back, that familiar hollow ache spreading from her stomach to her chest. Not just hunger for food, but for basic human dignity. She returned to her spot, watching Ashley bite into a sandwich she'd abandoned half-eaten. It was then that she noticed him. An older black man stood near the stage entrance, gray hair distinguished, gold-rimmed glasses catching the overhead lights. Unlike everyone else rushing around with clipboards and headsets, he stood perfectly still, watching. His posture carried an authority that needed no announcement, a warmth that radiated even from a distance. Their eyes met across the chaos. Something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, of possibility. The man's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to solve a puzzle. He began walking toward her, moving with purpose through the crowd. Richard intercepted him before he reached Kesha. "Mr. Mitchell, sir, I didn't realize you'd be observing today." Richard's confident swagger evaporated into nervous deference. "Is there something you need? I can have my assistant." "I'm fine, Richard." The man's voice was deep, measured, carrying the weight of someone used to being heard. "Just observing. Continue with your preparations." "Of course, sir. We have an excellent show lined up. Real talent. Top-tier contestants from the best music schools in the country." James Mitchell. Because that's who this had to be. The network executive whose name Grandma Dorothy had whispered like a prayer, nodded absently, his gaze drifting past Richard toward Kesha. Richard followed his look and something like concern flickered across his face. "Oh, the street girl, that's just a diversity element, you know, for contrast. Shows we're inclusive. We'll have her perform last after the real talent, too." "To what exactly?" James's tone remained mild, but something sharp edged beneath it. "To, round out the show, keep it interesting." Richard cleared his throat. "Nothing to worry about, sir, all under control." James hummed noncommittally and stepped past Richard, walking directly to where Kesha sat. "Hello," he said gently, crouching down to her level. "May I ask your name?" Kesha looked into his eyes, kind eyes that reminded her achingly of Grandma Dorothy's, and made a decision. Kesha Dorothy Williams. She watched his face carefully, emphasizing her middle name, and saw the exact moment recognition struck. James Mitchell froze, his professional composure cracking. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "Dorothy Williams," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Dorothy Williams was my grandmother. She raised me." James closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they shone with unshed tears. "Where is Dorothy now?" "She died 3 years ago, cancer. She couldn't afford the treatment." The words landed like physical blows. James's shoulders sagged, his hand coming up to cover his mouth. 3 years, he breathed. And you've been on the streets ever since. The executive director of one of America's largest television networks sat down on the floor beside a homeless 9-year-old girl, not caring about his expensive suit or who might be watching. "Dorothy saved my life," he said quietly. "When I was a young man trying to make it in this industry, a black kid from the Bronx with no connections, she took me under her wing, taught me about music, about dignity, about never letting this business steal your soul." "She was good at that," Kesha said, allowing herself a small smile. Did she teach you to sing?" "Everything I know." James looked at the broken guitar, at Kesha's bare feet, at the torn backpack that held all her worldly possessions. When he spoke again, his voice carried steel beneath the gentleness. "And Richard brought you here too." "To make people laugh," Kesha said simply. "To show contrast. To be the before in a before and after story where the other kids are the after." James's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "Does he know who you are, who Dorothy was to me?" "No, sir, nobody does." "Why haven't you told them?" Kesha met his gaze steadily. "Grandma Dorothy always said the best answer to prejudice is excellence they cannot deny. I didn't want anyone's pity or charity. I wanted to show them what I am on my own terms." A slow smile spread across James Mitchell's face, the same smile Dorothy used to wear when she was about to teach someone an unforgettable lesson. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you. Tell me, what can I do?" "Actually," Kesha said carefully, "can I ask you for a favor?" "Anything." "Don't interfere. Let them do exactly what they plan to do to me." James frowned, confused. "But they're going to try to humiliate you on national television." "I know." Kesha's smile matched his own now. "And when they try, I want you to record everything. Every second, every word, every reaction. Can you do that?" Understanding dawned in James's eyes. "You want them to show their true colors." "Grandma always said that sometimes people need to see the ugliness before they're ready to change. If you stop them now, they'll just be more careful next time. But if you let them reveal themselves, then we can use it to make real change." James nodded slowly, respect evident in his expression. "You're not just your grandmother's granddaughter, you're her legacy." 5 minutes to showtime. Richard's voice boomed through the backstage area. James stood, offering Kesha his hand and helping her to her feet. "I'll have my personal camera crew recording everything. And Kesha." "Yes, sir." "When you step onto that stage, sing like Dorothy taught you. Sing like the world depends on it. Because in a way, for all the children who will come after you, it does." Kesha nodded, clutching her broken guitar. As James walked away to discreetly position his cameras, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 long years. Not hope exactly, but something better. Purpose. Richard appeared, clipboard in hand, that cruel smile back in place. "Ready to entertain us, street girl?" "Yes, sir," Kesha said calmly. "I'm ready to show you exactly what I am." Part 4. The stage is set. The stage lights blazed with an intensity that would have blinded someone unprepared. But Kesha had spent 3 years watching Los Angeles sunsets from concrete sidewalks, had stared down the harsh fluorescent lights of shelter entrances, had performed in subway stations where shadows and brightness warred for dominance. These lights held no terror for her. She stood in the wings, watching as Ashley took the stage before her. The blonde girl's performance was technically flawless, every note placed precisely, every gesture practiced to perfection. The audience applauded warmly, their appreciation genuine but measured, the kind of polite response reserved for expected excellence. "Beautiful, just beautiful," Richard's voice boomed through the speakers as Ashley took her bow. "A perfect example of world-class training and natural talent combined. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what 6 years at the Manhattan School of Music looks like." Ashley's father beamed from the front row. already holding his phone up to capture his daughter's glory. Backstage, Richard turned to his assistant, speaking quietly but not quietly enough. "Okay, here's where it gets interesting. When the street kid comes out, I want you ready on the sound board. Give it about 30 seconds, then start the feedback. Make it loud, really disrupt her. The audience will think it's her fault that she can't handle professional equipment." The assistant shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, are you sure? She's just a kid." "She's content," Richard snapped. "This is television. We need moments that pop, things people will share on social media. Trust me, the contrast between our trained performers and that," he gestured dismissively toward Kesha, "will make for unforgettable TV." Kesha heard every word. Grandma Dorothy's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby girl, anger is a fire. You can let it burn you up, or you can forge something beautiful in its flames." She closed her eyes and began her breathing exercises, the ones Dorothy had taught her decades ago, techniques passed down from gospel singers who had learned to project their voices across packed churches without microphones, who had sung freedom songs that carried for blocks during marches, who had turned their voices into instruments of change. "And now," Richard announced, his voice dripping with false enthusiasm, "we have a very special performer for you. Found just this morning singing on the streets of Los Angeles, please welcome Kesha Williams." The applause was scattered, confused. Kesha walked onto that massive stage, her bare feet silent against the polished floor. She carried her broken guitar like a shield, her small frame dwarfed by the elaborate set design. The audience's murmuring grew louder as they took her in. The simple, worn clothes, the absence of shoes, the guitar that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster. Because it had been. In the front row, Ashley and her father exchanged knowing looks. In the wings, the other children watched with a mixture of pity and superiority. In the control booth, Richard grinned, his finger hovering over the talkback button. But in the back of the auditorium, partially hidden in shadow, James Mitchell stood with his personal camera crew, recording everything with professional-grade equipment that would capture every nuance, every cruel word, every moment of what was about to unfold. Kesha reached the microphone and looked out at the 500 faces watching her. For a moment, she was back in Grandma Dorothy's kitchen, 7 years old, learning her first scales while rain drummed against the windows. "My name is Kesha Dorothy Williams," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the microphone's amplification. "I'm 9 years old, and I want to dedicate this song to my grandmother, who taught me that music has no color and no social class." Richard frowned at the mention of Dorothy's name. Something about it nagged at him, but he quickly dismissed it. Just some random street woman, probably. Kesha adjusted her broken guitar, her fingers finding the strings with practiced ease. She strummed the opening chords of Amazing Grace, a song so old, so familiar, that it belonged to everyone and no one. The notes that emerged from her damaged instrument were pure, perfectly tuned, carrying a resonance that made several professional musicians in the audience sit up straighter in their seats. That's when Richard gave the signal. The sound system erupted in a deafening screech of feedback, a high-pitched wail that made people cover their ears and grimace. The guitar's amplification became a weapon of noise, designed to humiliate, to break, to prove that this little girl didn't belong on a professional stage. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed cruel, nervous laughter. Others looked angry, annoyed at the technical disruption. "Technical difficulties," Richard announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "I'm so sorry, folks. Sometimes these things happen with inexperienced performers. We'll have to cut this short." But Kesha didn't stop. She stepped away from the microphone, moved to the center of the stage, and set down her guitar. Then, with no amplification whatsoever, she began to sing. Her voice cut through the feedback like a blade through silk. Clear, powerful, absolutely perfect. The technique was something only Dorothy could have taught. the way to project sound from deep within the diaphragm, how to shape vowels to carry across distance, the secret of making every word felt rather than just heard. 3 years of singing in subway stations with trains roaring past, of performing on street corners with traffic drowning out lesser voices, of practicing in urban canyons where sound bounced off buildings. All of it had been training for this moment. One by one, people stopped covering their ears and started listening. The cruel laughter died. The annoyed expressions melted into stunned attention. Richard frantically signaled to cut the feedback, but by then it didn't matter. Kesha's voice had transcended the sabotage, had risen above it like dawn above darkness. She sang Amazing Grace, the way Dorothy had sung it, blending traditional gospel with classical techniques, adding runs and flourishes that spoke of a lifetime of study, not 9 years of life. Every note was placed with surgical precision. Every phrase carried an emotion so raw and real that people in the audience began to weep. Ashley's mouth hung open in disbelief. Her father's phone had dropped to his lap, forgotten. In the wings, the other children stood frozen, their practiced superiority crumbling as they witnessed something they'd never seen in their conservatory classes. True, undeniable talent born not from privilege but from necessity, not from instruction but from soul-deep knowing. The song built to its climax, Kesha's voice soaring high and pure, then settling into a gentle resolution that left the auditorium in absolute silence. 3 full seconds of stunned quiet. Then the explosion. The audience erupted to their feet, applause thundering through the space like a physical force. People were crying openly, shouting, cheering. The professional musicians were applauding with a fervor that spoke of recognition. They knew what they'd just witnessed. True, exceptional, once-in-a-generation talent. Richard stood paralyzed in the wings, his face pale, his carefully planned humiliation having transformed into something he never anticipated. He'd wanted to diminish her, and instead, he'd given her the perfect stage to prove she was extraordinary. In the back of the auditorium, James Mitchell smiled through his tears, his camera crew capturing every moment of the audience's response, every expression of stunned recognition, every second of this unexpected triumph. And on stage, Kesha Dorothy Williams stood quietly, her hands clasped in front of her, accepting the ovation with a grace that belied her 9 years. She didn't smile triumphantly. She didn't gloat. She simply bowed, a small, respectful bow that somehow made the moment even more powerful. Because she wasn't performing for revenge. She was performing for every child like her, for every person dismissed because of how they looked or where they came from, for her grandmother's memory, and for the simple, profound truth that talent knows no address, no skin color, no price tag. The applause continued, wave after wave, as Richard realized with growing horror that he'd just made the worst mistake of his career. Part 5: The Truth Unveiled. The applause showed no signs of fading when James Mitchell stepped onto the stage. His presence commanded immediate attention, not through force, but through the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of earned respect. The audience settled into curious silence, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice resonant and clear, "my name is James Mitchell. I'm the executive director of this television network." He paused, letting that information sink in. "And I need to tell you who this extraordinary young woman truly is." Backstage, Richard's face drained of color. He hadn't known James was even in the building, let alone watching the show. His mind raced, trying to calculate damage control, but it was too late for that. "Kesha Dorothy Williams," James continued, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, "is the granddaughter of one of the greatest voices this country has ever known. Dorothy Williams was a gospel singer and composer who graduated from Juilliard in the 1960s, a time when that achievement for a black woman was nearly impossible." The audience gasped, murmuring with recognition. Several older viewers nodded, remembering Dorothy's name from their youth. "Dorothy Williams was my mentor," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "When I was a young man trying to break into this industry with nothing but dreams and determination, she took me under her wing. She taught me about music, about dignity, about never compromising your integrity for success. She saved my life in ways I'm still discovering." He looked down at Kesha, his eyes shining. "Dorothy died 3 years ago. I didn't even know she had a granddaughter until today. While I've been sitting in boardrooms and offices, this child, this talented, remarkable child, has been living on the streets of Los Angeles, alone, surviving on courage and the gifts her grandmother passed down to her." The auditorium had gone completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving. "And today," James's voice hardened, "the producers of this show didn't bring Kesha here to celebrate her talent. They brought her here to mock her, to humiliate her, to use her poverty and circumstances as entertainment." Ashley's father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Around the auditorium, parents who had laughed earlier now couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "Every moment of what happened backstage was recorded," James continued. "Every cruel comment, every moment they denied her basic dignity, even refusing to let her eat while other children feasted. Every word about how she was here to provide contrast to the real talent." He turned to face the wings where Richard stood frozen. "Richard Brennan, step onto this stage." It wasn't a request. Richard emerged slowly, his confident swagger gone, replaced by the jerky movements of a man who knows he's walking toward his execution. Richard here thought it would be entertaining to sabotage a homeless 9-year-old's performance. He deliberately disrupted her sound equipment, hopping to make her look foolish. He called her content and comic relief. He told his staff that she would help the other children shine brighter by comparison. The audience's mood shifted from curiosity to anger. Someone booed, others joined in. "But what Richard didn't understand," James said, his voice softening as he looked at Kesha, "is that true talent doesn't need perfect conditions to shine. It doesn't require expensive equipment or ideal circumstances. True talent finds a way, always." He turned back to Richard, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Richard, you're fired. Not just from this show, but from this network. I will personally ensure that every production company, every broadcaster, every entertainment venue in this country knows exactly what you did here today." Richard's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "As for everyone else who participated in this cruelty," James looked toward the wings where Ashley and the other children stood, "I hope you've learned something today about judging people by their circumstances rather than their character, about the difference between privilege and talent, about basic human decency." Ashley stepped forward slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice small and trembling, "I'm so sorry. I was cruel and awful and I have no excuse. Kesha, I'm sorry." Several other children emerged, echoing Ashley's apology. Some were crying. All looked genuinely ashamed. James nodded to them, then addressed the full audience. "This moment is being broadcast live to millions of American homes. Tomorrow, the footage of what happened backstage will be released as well. Not to shame these children who can learn and grow, but to start a conversation this country needs to have." He knelt beside Kesha, speaking directly to her now. "Your grandmother would be so proud of you, not just because you sang beautifully, though you did, but because you faced cruelty with dignity. You didn't let them break you. You didn't become bitter. You just shined." Kesha's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she threw her arms around James, this man who had loved her grandmother, who understood what she'd lost, who saw her for who she truly was. The audience rose again, applauding not just for her performance now, but for her courage, for her grace, for the lesson she'd taught them all. When the cameras finally stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, many of them still wiping their eyes, James kept his arm around Kesha's shoulders. "I have so much to ask you," he said gently. "About Dorothy, about these 3 years, about everything. But first, when's the last time you ate a real meal?" "3 days ago." James closed his eyes briefly, pain flashing across his face. "Okay, first food, then we talk. And Kesha?" "Yes, sir." "You're not spending another night on the street. Not ever again. Your grandmother asked me once to look after you if anything happened to her. I failed her then, but I won't fail either of you again." As they walked off the stage together, Kesha carrying her broken guitar, neither of them saw Richard slip out the back exit, his career in ruins, his name about to become synonymous with cruelty and prejudice. They didn't see the producers scrambling to distance themselves from what had happened, or the social media accounts already exploding with the footage of Kesha's performance. What they did see was each other, a connection forged through Dorothy's love, through music, through the understanding that sometimes the hardest trials prepare us for our greatest triumphs. And somewhere, in whatever space exists beyond this world, Dorothy Williams smiled. Part 6, The Reckoning begins. The days following the broadcast moved with the force of an avalanche. By morning, Kesha's performance had been viewed over 50 million times across every social media platform. News outlets ran the story as their lead, and suddenly, America couldn't stop talking about the 9-year-old girl who sang without a microphone and brought a nation to tears. But it wasn't just her performance that captivated people. It was the footage James released the next day. Every cruel word, every dismissive laugh, every moment of calculated humiliation. Richard Brennan woke up to find his name trending nationwide, and not in any way he'd ever imagined. His social media accounts were flooded with millions of messages, each more condemning than the last. By noon, his phone was disconnected. By evening, he'd been forced to abandon his Los Angeles home, photographers camping outside, reporters demanding statements. "How could you do this to a child?" one headline screamed. "TV producer's career destroyed after trying to humiliate homeless girl," read another. But the story went deeper than one man's downfall. James Mitchell called another press conference, this time with Kesha seated beside him, wearing clean clothes for the first time in 3 years and holding her restored guitar. He'd had it professionally repaired while keeping its weathered appearance as a reminder of her journey. "This isn't just about punishing one person," James told the assembled media. "It's about examining the systems that allowed this to happen. It's about asking ourselves how we determine who deserves opportunities and who deserves mockery." A reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Mitchell, there are rumors you're implementing major changes at the network. Can you confirm?" "I can," James nodded. "Effective immediately, we're launching the Dorothy Williams program, named for Kesha's grandmother, my mentor, and one of the finest musicians this country ever produced. The program will offer full music scholarships to talented children from underserved communities, not as charity, but as recognition that talent exists everywhere, and it's our responsibility to nurture it wherever we find it." Another reporter spoke up. "And what about Ashley Thornton and the other children who participated in the bullying?" James's expression softened slightly. "Those children have issued public apologies. More importantly, their families are taking real action. Ashley's parents have withdrawn her from her exclusive conservatory and enrolled her in a public school where she'll learn alongside students from all backgrounds. Other families have made similar commitments. Children can learn and grow. That's our hope for them." Kesha leaned toward her microphone. "I forgave them," she said simply. "Hate doesn't heal anything. My grandmother taught me that." The simplicity and grace of her statement made headlines of its own. Meanwhile, Richard Brennan's downfall continued its rapid descent. Every production company he contacted for work turned him away. His name had become toxic. Entertainment Weekly ran a feature titled "The Fastest Career Implosion in Television History," detailing how 20 years of success had evaporated in less than 72 hours. He tried to salvage his reputation through a tearful interview where he claimed to have learned from his mistakes and insisted he'd acted under pressure to create compelling television. The interview backfired spectacularly. "You had 20 years in this industry," one commentator said on a talk show. 20 years to show basic human decency to a child. You don't get to blame pressure for calculated cruelty. By the end of the week, Richard had left Lowe's Angels entirely, retreating to a small town where nobody knew his face. His fall from grace was complete and entirely self-inflicted. But while Richard's story ended in shame, Kesha's was just beginning. James and his wife, Margaret, formally filed paperwork to become Kesha's guardians. Margaret, a warm woman with kind eyes who'd never been able to have children, embraced her new daughter with fierce love. "Your grandmother and I were friends too," Margaret told Kesha on their first evening together in the Mitchell home. "She used to tell me stories about you when you were little. She said you had a gift from God." "She said that about everyone," Kesha replied, looking around the comfortable guest room that was now hers, the first real room she'd had in 3 years. "Maybe, but with you she was right." The Dorothy Williams program received its first applications within days of the announcement. Hundreds of children from across the country, talented kids who'd been overlooked because of where they lived or what they looked like, suddenly had hope. Kesha spent hours reviewing applications with James, using her own experience to identify which children truly needed help versus which were simply opportunistic. "This one," she said, pointing to an application from a boy in Detroit who sang in his church but had never had formal training. "He has something real." "How can you tell?" James asked, genuinely curious. "The way he writes about music. He doesn't talk about wanting to be famous. He talks about how singing makes him feel like he can breathe. That's real." James smiled, just like Dorothy. As news of Richard's complete career collapse spread, some people argued that his punishment was too severe, that one mistake shouldn't destroy an entire career. But those arguments gained little traction. "It wasn't one mistake," a prominent child psychologist explained on television. "It was a pattern of behavior that revealed someone willing to traumatize a vulnerable child for ratings. That's not a mistake. That's a choice that shows character." Ashley Thornton, now attending a diverse public school in Lowe's Angels, began volunteering at a youth shelter on weekends. In a follow-up interview, she spoke candidly about her own transformation. "I thought talent meant being the best," she said. "But Kesha showed me that talent without kindness is worthless. I had every advantage she didn't, and she was still twice the artist I was. That humbled me. It needed to." The shift in Ashley seemed genuine. She and Kesha had begun corresponding through letters, building a friendship from the ashes of their first encounter. 6 months after the broadcast, the Dorothy Williams program had awarded scholarships to over 200 children. Each recipient received not just music education, but mentorship, resources, and a community that believed in them. And at the center of it all was Kesha, now 10 years old, living with James and Margaret in a home filled with music and love, but never forgetting the streets that had shaped her, the grandmother who had prepared her, or the lesson she'd taught America about the true meaning of talent. Part 7. The performance that changed everything. 6 months after her viral appearance, Kesha stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, wearing an elegant but simple dress, her grandmother's restored guitar in her hands. The venue sold out in under 2 hours when the concert was announced, all proceeds going to the Dorothy Williams program. Margaret adjusted Kesha's collar one final time, her eyes misty, nervous. "No," Kesha said honestly. "Grandma used to say that nerves mean you care about impressing people, but I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here to share what she taught me." From the wings, Kesha could see the audience filing in. Over 2,000 people, from former homeless youth who'd gotten tickets through the foundation, to celebrities and philanthropists who'd paid premium prices to support the cause. In the front row, James sat beside several members of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra who would be accompanying her. Ashley and her parents were there too, 3 rows back. Ashley caught Kesha's eye and gave an encouraging wave. They'd become genuine friends, proof that people could change when they chose to. The house lights dimmed. Conductor Michael Chang raised his baton. Kesha walked onto the stage that had hosted the greatest musicians in history, her bare feet, a deliberate choice, silent against the famous boards. The audience rose as one, applauding before she'd sung a single note. Kesha waited for them to settle, then spoke into the microphone. 3 years ago, I slept on these streets, right outside this building. I used to listen to the music drifting out through the vents and dream about what it would be like inside. Tonight, I'm dedicating this performance to every child still out there on those streets, and to the memory of my grandmother, Dorothy Williams, who taught me that music isn't about where you perform, it's about why. She nodded to Conductor Chang, and the orchestra began. The program was ambitious, a mix of classical pieces arranged by Dorothy decades ago, traditional spirituals, and original compositions Kesha had written in recent months. Each song told a story, of struggle, of hope, of loss, of finding home. When she sang Amazing Grace, the same song from that first performance, the entire audience wept. But this time, it wasn't just the raw emotion that moved them. It was hearing how her gift had grown, how professional training had enhanced rather than replaced the soul-deep truth in her voice. For the finale, Kesha performed a piece she composed herself, titled Dorothy's Song. It was a tribute to her grandmother, weaving together snippets of melodies Dorothy had taught her, gospel rhythms from their Harlem church, and classical techniques from Juilliard. The result was something entirely new, a bridge between worlds, between past and present, between where she'd been and where she was going. As the last note faded, silence filled Carnegie Hall. Then the audience exploded, a standing ovation that lasted over 10 minutes. People were crying openly, not from sadness but from the sheer power of witnessing something transcendent. Kesha bowed deeply, tears streaming down her own face now, no longer the composed child who'd faced humiliation with such dignity. Here, surrounded by love and recognition, she could finally let herself feel the weight of her journey. James joined her on stage, along with Margaret and the entire orchestra. "Before you leave tonight," James said into the microphone, "I want to share something. The concert you just witnessed raised $5 million for the Dorothy Williams program. $5 million that will provide full scholarships, instruments, instruction, and mentorship to children just like Kesha was, talented kids who deserve every opportunity to share their gifts with the world." The applause renewed, thunderous. "But more than that," James continued, "this program has already changed over 200 lives. Children who were overlooked, dismissed, or forgotten now have hope. And it all started because one little girl refused to let the world's cruelty diminish her light." He looked at Kesha with profound love. "Your grandmother always said that our gifts aren't just for ourselves. They're meant to build bridges for others to cross. Tonight, you've built a bridge that hundreds of children are already walking across, heading toward their own dreams." Backstage, after the crowd finally dispersed, Kesha found a quiet corner. She opened her backpack, new now, but she still carried Grandma Dorothy's letter with her everywhere, and read the words she'd memorized long ago. "When you're ready to use everything I taught you, you'll know. And when that moment comes, don't sing for revenge. Don't sing for applause. Sing for every child who comes after you, who needs to know that their circumstances don't define their worth. Sing for the truth, baby girl. The rest will follow." Ashley approached hesitantly. I don't even have words. You were incredible." "Thank you," Kesha said sincerely, "and thank you for coming." "Of course." Ashley sat down beside her. You know, when I saw that video of your first performance, I was horrified. Not just at you, at myself, at who I was that day. Sometimes I still can't believe I treated you that way." "We all have moments we're not proud of," Kesha replied. "What matters is what we do after." "My parents are donating to the program, and I've been volunteering at the youth shelter, teaching basic music theory to kids who have never had lessons. It's changed me." "Good," Kesha smiled. "That's exactly what Grandma would have wanted, not punishment but transformation." As the evening wound down and Kesha prepared to leave with James and Margaret, a young boy approached, maybe 11 years old, wearing clothes that had seen better days. "Miss Williams," he said shyly, "I'm Marcus. I got accepted to the Dorothy Williams program last month. I start training next week." Kesha knelt down to his level. "That's wonderful, Marcus. Do you sing?" "Yeah, but I've never had real lessons. Just what I learned in church and watching videos online." "That's how lots of great musicians start," Kesha said warmly. "Trust the process. Work hard. And remember, talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. You're getting an opportunity now. Make the most of it." "I will, I promise." Marcus hesitated, then added, "My mom is working 3 jobs to support us. When I told her about the scholarship, she cried for an hour. She said it was an answer to prayer." Kesha's eyes filled with tears, remembering her own grandmother's sacrifices. "Then you make sure your mom knows every day that her hard work mattered, that you see her, and you're going to make her proud." "I will," Marcus said fiercely. As James drove them home through Manhattan's glittering streets, Kesha watched the city lights blur past the window. Somewhere out there, children were sleeping on subway grates, singing for coins, dreaming of chances they might never get. But now, because of one televised humiliation turned triumph, 200 of those children had their chance, and more were coming. "What are you thinking about?" Margaret asked gently from the front seat. "About how many more there are," Kesha replied. "How many talented kids are still out there, still overlooked." "We can't save everyone," James said quietly. "No," Kesha agreed, "but we can save some, and those kids will save others. That's how change happens, one person at a time, one opportunity at a time." James smiled, seeing Dorothy's wisdom flowering in her granddaughter. "Your grandmother would be so proud of who you're becoming." "I hope so," Kesha said, clutching her restored guitar. "Because everything I do from now on, I'm doing for her, and for every kid who needs to know that their beginning doesn't have to be their ending." Part 8, Legacy. 2 years had passed since that first performance on Stars of America. Kesha, now 11, sat in a comfortable office in the Dorothy Williams Music Center, a new facility built in downtown Los Angeles specifically to house the scholarship program that had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Over 1,000 children had now received full scholarships. The program had expanded to include not just music education, but mentorship, mental health support, housing assistance for families in need, and connections to opportunities that would have been impossible before. James knocked on the doorframe of Kesha's office. Yes, she had an office now, as the program's youth director and face of the foundation. "You ready for the interview?" Almost. Kesha was reviewing applications for the next scholarship cycle, her eyes scanning each story with the care of someone who understood what each word represented. A national news program was doing a 2-year follow-up piece, tracking what had happened to everyone involved in that transformative moment. The camera crew set up in the music center's main hall, where dozens of children were practicing, some on donated instruments, others working with professional instructors who'd volunteered their time. "Let's start with Richard Brennan," the interviewer said once filming began. "Do you know what happened to him?" Kesha nodded slowly. "He moved to a small town in Oregon. Last I heard, he's working in sales. His entire career in entertainment ended that day." "Do you feel any responsibility for that?" No, Kesha said simply. He made his choices. All I did was sing. What happened to him was the consequence of his own actions, his own cruelty. I didn't destroy his career. He did that himself. And Ashley Thornton, we understand you two have become friends. Kesha smiled. Ashley has changed completely. She's actually here today. She volunteers with the program every weekend, teaching music theory to younger kids. She's learned humility and compassion. People can grow if they choose to. The interviewer shifted topics. The program has changed thousands of lives now. How does that feel? Overwhelming sometimes, Kesha admitted. But mostly it feels like I'm finally understanding what Grandma Dorothy always told me, that our gifts aren't just for ourselves. Every child who gets an opportunity through this program is honoring her memory. Speaking of which, we have someone who wants to say hello. The interviewer gestured off camera and Marcus, the boy from the Carnegie Hall concert, walked into frame. He was older now, 13, carrying a cello case and wearing the confident air of someone who'd found their calling. Marcus, Kesha jumped up to hug him. Hey, Kesha, Marcus grinned. I wanted to thank you on camera. 2 years ago, I was sleeping in shelters and singing for change. Now I'm first chair in the youth symphony. I've been accepted to the pre-college program at Juilliard, and my mom doesn't have to work 3 jobs anymore because the foundation helped her get training for a better career. That's incredible, Kesha said, genuine joy lighting her face. It's because you showed the world that talent doesn't care about zip codes or bank accounts, Marcus continued. You gave kids like me hope, and more than that, you gave us a path forward. The interview continued, but the most powerful footage came from the B-roll. Shots of the music center bustling with activity, children from every background working together, learning together, creating beauty together. Later that week, the network aired a special titled, Where Are They Now? The Kesha Williams Effect. It tracked not just Kesha's journey, but the ripple effects that had spread across the country. Richard Brennan was featured briefly, a cautionary tale. He appeared on camera for 30 seconds, offering what seemed like a rehearsed apology, but his eyes were empty, his words hollow. He'd learned nothing except regret for being caught. Ashley's segment was longer and more genuine. She spoke about volunteering, about learning humility, about discovering that true talent required not just skill but character. I had every advantage, Ashley said to the camera. The best schools, the best instructors, a family with money and connections. And I was still only half the musician Kesha was at 9 years old. That taught me that technical perfection without soul is just noise. She had soul, and she taught me how to find mine. But the heart of the special was the children, over 1,000 of them now, whose lives had been transformed by Dorothy Williams's legacy carried forward through her granddaughter. A 15-year-old opera singer from Detroit who'd been discovered singing at a bus stop. A 12-year-old violinist from rural Mississippi who'd never seen a real violin before the program gave him one. A 14-year-old composer from the Bronx who'd written symphonies in her head while living in foster care, never imagining they'd be performed by real orchestras. Each story was different, each one was miraculous. The special ended with footage from a gala concert celebrating the program's 2nd anniversary. Kesha performed alongside 50 scholarship recipients, their voices and instruments blending into something that transcended any individual performance. When the final note faded, James Mitchell took the microphone one last time. 2 years ago, a television producer made a terrible mistake. He thought he could use a child's circumstances to make people laugh. What he didn't understand is that talent, real, true, undeniable talent, can't be mocked. It can only be celebrated or ignored. And when you try to mock it, you reveal far more about yourself than about the person you're targeting. He looked at Kesha with paternal pride. This young woman could have let that experience fill her with bitterness. Instead, she let it fill her with purpose. She took humiliation and turned it into opportunity for hundreds of children just like her. That's not just talent, that's character, that's grace. That's the legacy of Dorothy Williams living on. The audience rose in ovation, and as Kesha took her bow, she thought about how far she'd come from that morning 2 years ago when she'd woken up hungry and barefoot beneath a pawn shop awning. She thought about Grandma Dorothy and how every lesson, every sacrifice, every hour of training had been preparing her for something bigger than either of them could have imagined. She thought about the 1,000 children whose lives were different now because of one moment of televised cruelty that had become a catalyst for change. And she thought about the simple truth that had sustained her through everything. That true worth isn't determined by circumstances, that talent doesn't choose its birthplace, and that dignity can never be taken from someone who refuses to surrender it. 3 months later, Kesha received a handwritten letter forwarded to the foundation. The return address was from a small town in Oregon. Inside was a single page, written in Richard Brennan's hand. I don't expect forgiveness and I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I think about what I did every single day. I tried to diminish you to elevate myself, and instead, I destroyed everything I'd built while you soared higher than I ever did. You were right to expose me. The world needs to see what cruelty looks like so people can choose something different. I hope the children in your program never meet someone like the person I was. Richard. Kesha read the letter twice, then carefully filed it away. Not because she wanted to treasure it, but because it was part of the story. A reminder that actions have consequences, that cruelty leaves scars on everyone involved, and that sometimes the person who suffers most from hatred is the one who chooses to embody it. She didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say. Richard's redemption, if it came at all, would have to come from his own choices, not from her absolution. Instead, Kesha returned to what mattered. The applications on her desk, each one representing a child waiting for their chance, their moment, their opportunity to show the world what they carried inside. She picked up her pen and wrote across the top of one application. A 10-year-old boy from Houston who sang in his church and dreamed of studying classical music. Approved. Welcome to the Dorothy Williams program. Your journey begins now. And somewhere in the universe where love transcends death and legacies bloom across generations, Dorothy Williams smiled at her granddaughter and whispered the words she'd said so many times before. That's my girl. Now go build more bridges. There are still so many children waiting to cross. The end. The story of Kesha Williams reminds us that talent knows no boundaries, that circumstances don't define worth, and that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from becoming so extraordinary that we inspire everyone, including those who once opposed us, to become better versions of themselves. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Unbroken Grace Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.